What? Coaches. Blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, they can't hold a flame against you, ay. Blow the whistle, blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, got the game, it ain't no issue, yeah. Blowing the whistle, I had enough with you, the championship, it is gone. Ain't listen to you, I can't give it to you, cause you don't know what I've been on. This is the Coaches Podcast.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back into the Fantasy Coaches Podcast. I am your host, as always, everyone. Coach Steve here. We have another amazing episode for you guys today. We are talking about make or break players, basically fantasy players who, this is kind of like a last chance. You don't really want to maybe draft them after this season if they really don't do it for you, So this is a make or break season for some players here. Other coaches are not here tonight. They got some things going on. But I do have a fantastic guest. And Bob Long. Bob, what's going on? Welcome into the show again.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. As always, I can tell an FF man bun intro when I hear one. Love that dude. He does some of our stuff as well. So always love those intros he puts together. Thanks for having me. I got some make or break players. You have one that's in my local area that we are all chomping at the bit to figure out. But excited to be here. Thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was telling Bob before the show, whenever I invite Bob on the show, I know it's almost football season, or at least things are starting to ramp up at this point here with obviously Scott Fishbowl in another month, and then training camps, and then the Expo, and then before you know it's the NFL draft is here, obviously. So we have a lot to go through today, and then we'll talk some more things at the end of the show. So let's get through the news portion of the show here. We got some things happened over this past week and a half here, a week since Louis Bass been on. As of yesterday, T. Higgins signed his tenure, so he will play for the Cincinnati Bengals this season here. Bob, how do you feel about T. Higgins this season? Do you expect him? I feel like I've heard a lot of things where they're like, well, he's probably going to try to take it easy so he can get a big contract, or no, he's going to ball out this year and have a big season. So how do you feel about T. Higgins?
It's funny. I almost put him on this list of make or break, right? Because this is the year that he's got to prove that he's worth the big money. He thinks he is, and the numbers maybe prove a little bit different, especially the last year. Now I get it. Burrow is out, but still, Jamar Chase seemed to pull it together not too badly. Interestingly enough, I was just in a expert draft with a bunch of folks that we always start real early. And I got T. Higgins as my wide receiver 3 in like round 6. I'm like, all right, I'll take that. Because he hadn't signed yet. And I'm like, now that he's signed, I'm like, all right, now I feel much better about it. I don't think he'll stay there for very long. I'm sure once he gets to camp and if he's starting to look good again, he'll start moving way up again. I don't think he'll get as high as he used to from an ADP standpoint, but he's definitely going to get higher than he is now. So, he's got a lot to prove, and I'm okay with him. I mean, I think, again, if you can get him as a good value pick, he's got the talent. Just a question of whether he puts it all together to prove he's worth the money.
Yeah, that's 100% true. I mean, we've seen it in his career that he's been able to thrive for big games. It's just that injuries, him leaving early in so many games, I think last year just scared so many people. And just a general sense of fantasy, what's going on today. It is a make or break season for him because, if he kind of comes out like with 700 yards, 7 touchdowns, is he going to he probably will see a big contract. It's just the NFL, but it's like, how much do you want him in fantasy as much? If he has a big season, he's in his prime and he goes to a new team where he's a featured wide receiver 1, like that's going to be big for fantasy. Like people who play Dynasty, you're going to love that. People for next redraft season, he's going to be high up the boards if he can kind of have a really good year. But health is a major key for him and his surrounding castmates. So, all right, over to the next few things here. Injury roundups. Some injuries happened at minicamp last week here. Just want to kind of briefly go through. Gus Edwards was one. This undisclosed injury, didn't really say what it was unless Bobby was different yet. But does this change anything for this backfield for you? I don't know how high or low you were on this backfield, but
I like Edwards if I can get him as my RB3 on my team, but I'm not sure I'm going to grab him as a 2. He's certainly in the right situation, right? Jim Harbaugh as the coach definitely will be a run first offense. If Edwards can stay healthy and be the majority of the carries. But, he didn't do a bad job in Baltimore, but he was mostly about touchdowns. Now, if you're in a touchdown-only league, which aren't many left, but I'm in one, and I've been in once for my 40th year, Gus Edwards is on my team, so I'm very excited about it because he's going to be the only guy getting the ball. But, yeah, I wouldn't reach too high for him. I don't know what this undisclosed injury is, but at this point of the summer, I'm not sure I'm too worried about it.
That's fair. I mean, if you people were worried about it, there are definitely other options. Kimai Deval is a rookie that I very much like going into the draft, and he landed obviously in a great landing spot. So someone to keep your eye on if you're in Dynasty. It might be something worth. His hype is a little high right now, unfortunately, but if you can still get him for the cheap, I would highly consider it. And obviously, when redrafts get here, again, we'll probably talk more about the running backs, but he's someone that might sneak up a little bit as we get to August. So. Over to the next injury roundup here. Last one, Juwan Johnson, foot injury. He's definitely going to be out at least until training camp, from what I remember reading about here. He's getting surgery, if I'm not mistaken here. So Juwan Johnson 2 years ago had a really nice breakout season for a tight end position last year, dealt with injuries. Really wasn't that good here. Again, there's really probably not too much to say here, Bob. I mean, maybe Taysom Hill now becomes more.
Yeah, if you didn't draft Taysom Hill before, you should now anyway. But I am noticing, like, what league was I in? And I looked to grab him. I don't know if it was MFL or if it's sleeper, but he's only a quarterback. I'm hoping that maybe they'd move him back to tight end if he does assume that position with Juwan Johnson going down. But if you can get him as a tight end, I mean, they're talking about him just like they have in the past, where he's going to be running the ball, throwing the ball, catching the ball. So, again, as a tight end, if you can grab him as a tight end, especially if you can get him late, yeah, I'm grabbing him in a heartbeat. He can certainly get some points, especially if you're in a very deep league or extra flexes. That he's a good find.
Yeah, definitely. And again, with Juwan Johnson's injury, I personally, I have never been a fan of anyone who's injured their foot prior to the season and expect them to be able to last 17 games or at least play to that speed while they're dealing with a foot injury. So that's definitely a concern for anyone who has Juwan Johnson, say in Dynasty, or if you're considering him late in maybe a deeper league, it's probably best to kind of stay away from him because Taysom Hill will probably get his workload in there and whatnot. So, and then obviously the last big news that hit over the week, last week at some point, Trevor Lawrence gets the bag. Wow, how do you feel about this?
I don't like it at all unless you're Trevor Lawrence. I just sit there and I think sometimes, how dumb are these executives? Like, how do you sit there and go, this kid is Joe Burrow-esque or Patrick Mahomes-esque? He had one good game where he came back and won a playoff game, but last year he didn't do very good at all. I don't get it, but I get he's young, right? He's 26, 25, 26. Yeah, he's the future, but I'm not sure I would have sat there as the executive and go, I don't think he's worth top dollar. I'll give you $45 million a year for him, but I'm not giving you 55. And even that's ridiculous, but that's the market. But I just, how these people are, I mean, hats off to the negotiators, right? Their agents, especially since they probably get 10% or whatever percentage they get.
It was 5 years, what, 225? I think tied for the highest paid.
That's 275.
275.
Yeah,
highest.
Yeah, so $55 million a year. So he's tied for most per year with Joe Burrow now. And so now you've got. They're talking about Dak getting $60 million. There's another guy that I wouldn't give more than 40 or 50 to, but then again, they gave $40 million to Daniel Jones. So
we just live in the world of quarterbacks. Believe me, as a Dolphins fan, having to deal with that now with Tua.
Oh, I know. Yeah, now you got Tua, and it's like, do you pay this guy? And then
I've got to feel it with Jordan Love.
More concussion.
Yeah, definitely not great. But like again, last year was not a good year for Trevor Lawrence. Outside of a 4-game stretch where he was just on fire. I mean. Right. He barely got over 20 points in, 12 other games. Mm-hmm. So and for fantasy, it's not, it doesn't change obviously your opinion on him. If you maybe in Dynasty, you like him a little bit better because hopefully he's tied for the team for at least 3 more years. So you have a potential starting quarterback, but for redraft season, it really doesn't change too much, but it's something to mention and just to complain about why Trevor Lawrence got all this money. So that's where we're going with that conversation. So, all right, that's enough for the news. Oh, you know what? Brandon Ayuk, just throwing it out there. He said that his team, that 49ers don't want him. So that was fun to see that. I don't know if you saw that, Bob, but
it's not a question where they don't want him. They don't want to pay him as much.
They
as
don't want to pay him. That's it.
I mean, he's another one of those. I put him in the same level as T. Higgins. Now, if T. Higgins would have had a really good year last year, like Ayuk had, but he had one good season. And now he wants to get paid like, Justin Jefferson and these guys. I'm like, no. And I don't blame John Lynch. So, in fact, interestingly enough, I don't remember if we had this conversation, but I used to be a driver for Hall of Fame weekend.
Yes.
3 years ago, I drove John Lynch. And so we had a lot of conversations about, and that year I remember specifically asking him about Ayuk versus Deebo Samuels. And he goes, Ayuk's having a terrible spring or summer. He goes, he's just not getting it together. He's, mentally not there. Deebo's the man, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, last year before the season started, I saw John briefly and I said, how's Ayuk doing? He goes, he's really got his head together this year. I really think he's going to put it together. So 3 years ago, John Lynch was pretty much done with him. He had no desire to think that this kid was going to make it. And then he has a good year and now he wants paid, like these top players, and John Lynch ain't going to do it. John Lynch saw, his attitude, and he had a good year, but that's because he was playing for the money. Now he thinks he should get paid. And I'm like, John, hey, if you don't prove it every year, if you have an attitude problem every once in a while, I don't want you. You go somewhere else and see if they pay you. But I don't blame him. I'd say goodbye. I mean, they drafted who'd they draft? They drafted a decent player. Right. Yeah. So I'd let him walk as well.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. He is definitely a potential player to get traded in the next month and a half. So keep your eyes on that, because I know the teams like the Steelers and the Commanders
could use him.
Panthers. So those could be some interesting teams we see over the next month here. So keep your eyes on Brandon Ayuk. So, all right. So let's get into our make or break players. Like I said, if you guys are just tuning in, basically players who we're kind of on the last limb with for fantasy. Maybe we'll draft them, but this is it. If they don't perform the standard, probably Bob too, probably don't really want them on your fantasy team or your dynasty roster, whatever you want to call it, in the future after this season. So this is a big season for a lot of players here. And Bob, I'm gonna let you go first for your first one.
So the guy I put first is Daniel Jones. 2 years ago, Brian Dable came in town. Jones actually was pretty decent, ranked 12th in total points fantasy-wise. Didn't do poorly for the garbage he had around him. Last year, the garbage was no better, and he got injured, and it was just a complete mess. But the thing was, they already paid him 4 years, $160 million, but he's only got one more year of guaranteed money. That's this year. So this year he has to go out and improve. Now they went and got Malik Neighbors. They've got, so they've got some more weapons. They got Devin Singletary now as their running back. He's not Saquon Barkley, but it's not terrible. But I really feel like Jones has to go out and just at worst just not suck. If you can match 2022's numbers, the Giants are competitive. He's decent from a fantasy perspective, plays all the games, doesn't stay, stays healthy. That'll probably keep him there. But if not, they may just let him walk, and he's got his guaranteed money and he can take a hike. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, he just hasn't been the player. I don't know if he just took the attitude, I got paid, so screw you all, but doesn't seem like that should be that way. But Jones is my first guy.
Yeah, not if you're playing quarterback, because you can definitely get another contract. If we've seen many times, if you play just well enough, you're getting another contract potentially. So I don't know why Daniel Jones would want to play so poorly. I guess 1 year of 80 or was 100 something million. That's good enough for me. So in this world of days, you want as much money as you possibly get. So, but Yeah, Daniel Jones, he's definitely an interesting person going into this season here. I think at this point, he's starting to become more of a potential sleeper for a lot of people, especially if you're playing in the super flex league, because of the rushing mobility that he offers here. Now, if the offense is going to change, allow him to throw the ball downfield more often. That was the key thing for me last year that I had struggled with, because 2 years ago, he was like 30th in the league in deep ball attempts. So they weren't throwing deep. There were a lot of short passes. And, with Malik Neighbors on the field, that should hopefully maybe open up a little bit more. Because they have so many. I mean, they got rid of a lot of slot wide receivers, but they still have a lot of slot wide receivers on that team there. And it just involves them, making good passes and getting him to run the ball, because he is a weapon on the field for fantasy for running. So if he could do that, that would be great. But again, there's a lot of question marks with his ability to throw the ball downfield. And again, if he doesn't do well this year, obviously the Giants might boot him, and obviously no one's going to want him in fantasy, outside of a QB3 at best. So Daniel Jones is in a big make or break season here. So my first one here for a make or break is actually Deshaun Watson. And obviously Deshaun Watson, me and Bob were talking about him prior to the show here. Deshaun Watson, he's in this make or break season for us in fantasy at this point. It's been a couple years since this whole situation went down. He's played for the Browns the last 2 years. Last year was, his first full season. And it just really didn't work out well. He got hurt early on. And even in the year before, when he did play the final 6 games of the season, he didn't look good. Russ, you haven't played in a couple years. Okay. Coming in this year, you had a full offseason with the team here. I'm assuming you're working out and getting back in shape. And on the field, when you looked at him, it was just like, what is he throwing the ball with? Like, what is he doing? Like, it was so baffling what he was doing on the field. And watching those Browns games, I'm like, this is not Deshaun Watson I remember 4 or 5 years ago. Like, this is something completely different. Again, barely over 2,000 yards in 12 games with the Browns, 14 passing touchdowns, 300 yards on the ground. Again, not Deshaun Watson in a full season when he was back in Houston. Now, again, injuries, rotator cuff, shoulder fracture. Again, those are some massive injuries I have to deal with as a quarterback, obviously. So, you want to give him a pass, obviously, going into this season here. And, when he played actually for fantasy, he wasn't bad. 3 of the 5 games that he actually fully played, he had over 20 fantasy points. That is encouraging going into the season. They have a few more weapons, whether or not you believe Jerry Jeudy, is an actual solid wide receiver 2 or not, or if you think David Njoku can keep this up, or Amari Cooper's age is not going to catch up with him this season. And they actually have a really decent run game this year if they can find that consistency this year. Maybe hopefully Nick Chubb comes back. I love Nick Chubb. But this is the season for Deshaun Watson. Like, you're getting paid guaranteed money to be on this team. I mean, he probably is going to be there for another year, maybe even if after this season here. But like for fantasy, like you really need to play 17 games. We need to see some old Deshaun Watson. We need to see you running the ball once again. Someone who, again, 4 or 5 years ago was considered a top 3 fantasy quarterback. Right. And this is it. This is a make or break season for Deshaun Watson. So assuming you feel similar there, Bob.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like you said, living in Cleveland, living in this area, it's it's a lot. But, some of the things I've talked about with people is it's what he's done off the field and not the past off the field. There's a difference between Joe Burrow and Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, or Joe Burrow last year, after he got injured, was on the sidelines for every game, there with the coaches, with Jake Browning, talking through the things with him, mentoring him, helping him. Deshaun Watson was sitting in somebody's, suite up in the stands. That's the difference between Deshaun Watson and Joe Burrow. That's why I think Deshaun Watson is not going to pull this off, because he just doesn't seem motivated. And, because they paid him all this money and it's guaranteed. That shouldn't be his attitude. His attitude should be, I'm very blessed to be doing this and I should be doing my best and, putting it out there. But, we'll see if that happens. Now, I've heard good things out of camp. He's throwing great. His arm looks fantastic, blah, blah, blah. But, till he gets on the field and there's people coming at him that want to hurt him, not just other guys are just going to swipe by him and not touch him. We'll see if that makes a difference. But, I mean, this team is loaded. They won 11 games last year with 4 different quarterbacks. If he can't win at least 11 games and get him into the playoffs again, there's a problem, and he needs to go.
Yeah, that's very true. And right now, again, he's a good value right now on
Oh,
ADP
yeah.
21. But like,
Practically
do you
free.
want to trust him late? Like, do you want to trust him late? Like that's the issue. I think he's a better. Let me take a risk with somebody else and get a stable quarterback rather than just take Deshaun Watson late. And I know people love to take late round quarterbacks, and I just don't think Deshaun Watson is trustworthy enough to do that because the risk. There's more risk, I think, than the reward right now with Deshaun Watson. Like with Daniel Jones, I feel like there might be a little bit more reward because of the rushing value. He does more. He does offer a little bit more. But with Watson right now, there's some concerns for me. So, all right, Bob, let's get over to your second make or break player here. It's a running back this time. So who is that?
Najee Harris. For 2 years leading up to 2023, he was 76% consistent both seasons, ranked 6th. Certainly looked like the back, but he kind of started tailing off late in 2022. They got Jaylen Warren, and last year they kind of shared carries. And interestingly enough, they both were like within 3 points of each other or something in total points. But we're coming into this year, and I feel like Harris needs to prove something for himself and for fantasy purposes. And this is why I kind of like him where the value he's at. A lot of people are leaving him out, as a RB3 because they're thinking Warren's going to take over, and he might. But you're running, you're in an Arthur Smith offense, which they run the ball on 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th down. It doesn't matter. They would let their punter run the ball if they have to. But he's got something to prove. They did not pick up his 5th-year option, so he will be a free agent at the end of the year. If he goes out and sets, even matches 21 or 22's numbers, he's certainly a worthy RB3 flex kind of guy. Could be your starter every week, because he's got to go out and prove that he's going to be worth going to another team or staying with the Steelers, one of the two. So it's a make or break year. I like the fact that he's got something to play for, and I'd be happy to draft him as my RB3 at this point. His ADP is more like late RB2, like RB 20 to 22. But, again, depends on your league, depends on when he goes, who you draft early. But, I think he'd be a really good pick.
Yeah, no, this is for his career. It's definitely a make or break season. That's for sure. And even obviously in fantasy, I think there's more appeal for him this year. Obviously with the Arthur Smith offense, like you mentioned, we know Arthur Smith has been a fan of running the ball with his running backs. He obviously loves to use multiple running backs, as we saw with him last year in Atlanta, which really annoyed many fantasy owners. But now Najee Harris, his yards per carry hasn't always been the highlight of his NFL career, but when he's given the workload, he can produce in fantasy. I mean, down the stretch last year when he was given, more than 16 carries, I mean, he put up, decent fantasy numbers, and he was able to score too. And then that's a big thing for him is being able to score.
Yeah, he's got the goal line.
8 touchdowns. That's big last year. I could see him doing that again this year in this Arthur Smith offense. I mean, there's a lot of potential. I know everyone loves Jaylen Warren, and I get the love for Jaylen Warren, the speed that he offers. But the importance is getting those touchdowns. And if Najee Harris can get, close to another 220 carries this year and 8 touchdowns, I mean, he should probably be in for a really good season. But again, if he struggles, if Jaylen Warren looks better than him, you're going to want him in fantasy, and he's probably not going to get another contract somewhere else. I mean, he probably will get put somewhere, but it won't be like we saw this past offseason with a lot of running backs getting big contracts. He was already an older prospect coming out, and it's not good for him. So
if I'm not mistaken, I thought Najee lost some weight and got in better shape too.
Yeah, that's right.
So again, I think that shows you that he's motivated. He's got to go out and do something. So, and I think if they're smart, they mix it up in Pittsburgh. Maybe Warren runs early with his speed. And then, if they have a lead, then they grind it out with Najee at the end because he's more of a grinder than a speed demon.
That's true. And again, the defense is going to keep these guys in games whether or not the offense can produce, so that it's going to allow them to run the ball at times. And again, I personally love running backs in redraft that are in the contract year because we've seen it, time after time that they love to step up and produce, because if they don't, they're not going to get any sort of contract. So,
Right.
big make or break season. Like I said, I like to see Najee Harris make it. All right, over to my second make or break, guys. It's Quentin Johnston, second-year wide receiver from the Los Angeles Chargers. And Quentin Johnston, he definitely was a favorite of mine coming out of the draft. I know people were very indifferent about him, and the landing spot seemed great at the time. But again, it also at the time was like, well, he's behind two guys. You know, there wasn't going to be much room for him. Well, Mike Williams goes down pretty early, and this was the opportunity Quentin Johnston was supposed to get to produce. And, well, it was a very, very terrible season for him. He did not produce very well at all in fantasy. It was atrocious. I think people might have drafted him as a late round flyer in a lot of redrafts. And then by week 3, week 4, it was kind of all done. I mean, he finished the season with 400 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Right.
He had a decent ADOT of 12.9. And, you know, even at some point, Keenan Allen went out, and it was like, all right, this is your time to step up. But still, there wasn't anything there. Again, there's a lot of factors that could have been, you know, he maybe just wasn't ready for the season here. You know, Justin Herbert, you know, obviously went out with an injury at some point. There could have been something that was lingering prior to that caused Justin Herbert to kind of not be himself this past season here. And now Johnson's had a real opportunity here. And again, it's very hard if you don't really produce as a rookie wide receiver. It's really hard for you to really take that next step. There's a lot of data behind it nowadays where it's just like, if you don't hit a certain threshold anymore, I think it's like 500 receiving yards, which I read recently. It was like, you're just really not going to make it. This is a prime opportunity for him. They did take a wide receiver early in Ladd McConkey. They have Josh Palmer. When he's healthy on the field, he does really well in fantasy. And now they're a run-first offense. And Johnson might not get the targets and the opportunity that we all want from this year. So I'm pretty nervous about him this year. I mean, I want him to produce. I have a ton of shares of him in Dynasty. But for this season, I will probably stay clear of him unless he falls into like maybe the last round of drafts, or if he becomes a free agent right after the draft's over and there's an opportunity for me to get him. But I'm kind of staying away. I think it might be a break, unfortunately, for Quentin Johnston. I'm not overly high on him at this point. How do you feel about him, Bob?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, this has got to be the year. He's got to go out there and prove it. He had some opportunities last year and did not. Again, they probably won't be throwing the ball a ton, but they're still going to be playing Kansas City. And, you know, some of these teams are going to put up some numbers. So, you know, they can't run the ball every down against those kind of teams, because they're probably going to be down 2 touchdowns real quick if they aren't be careful playing against Patrick Mahomes and company. But yeah, I mean, he's got to get in the sync and he's got to produce. And you're right, it's certainly a make or break for him, but it also comes down to health. You know, Mike Williams is, you know, he's basically Mike Williams 2.0. I mean, that's what he's starting out to be.
Yes.
You know, all the talent in the world, all the speed in the world, but, you know, pulls a muscle every time he sneezes. So
it took Mike Williams a lot of time to figure it out.
Oh, yeah, no.
It might take Quentin Johnston just as long. I think year 5, that's when Mike Williams had his big season, and he still got hurt that year.
Right. Still can't stay healthy.
Even the years prior, it was like he had 1,000 yards. Oh, then he had 12 touchdowns, but never in the same season.
Time, right.
Quentin Johnston's got a lot of work to do to gain my trust again. But again, if he has another season where he is just kind of 600 yards, 4 touchdowns, like, they're going to call him a bust. They're going to call him a first-round bust, and no one's really going to consider him moving forward in many situations, redraft or dynasty. So. Okay. All right, Bob, you have a third one here. We went to 3 this time around. Who is your third option at make and break this year?
Well, we're going to stay with this kind of theory of young wide receivers who are overhyped but can't stay healthy. And I'm going to go with Christian Watson from the Packers. For the last 3 years, you know, this is going into his 3rd year. You know, this kid has been grossly overhyped, hasn't put it together. You know, I think last year's ADP, I swear, was in the top 30 wide receivers at one point. And, you know, this year, at least his ADP is sitting around 47. But I'm still not sure I'd even still take him, because, you know, you've got so many other guys like Jaden Reed on that team. And, you know, Romeo Doubs still was pretty good last year. And and Don Tave, I don't know, Wicks, Dontavian Wicks.
Dontavian Wicks.
So, they have a ton of choices there. And if Watson doesn't get his act together, I think he's the odd man out, because he certainly hasn't proved that he can hold down the fort. In state last year, he only played 9 games, missed most of the season again. Like I said, his value is good. You can get him as a wide receiver 4 probably here. But again, I'm still not sure if I'd even take the risk. I feel like there's other people in that area, ADP wise, that's got to have more potential, more trust that I would have in them of producing and staying on the field than I do Watson. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I did a whole article breakdown of the Packers wide receivers, and he was the leading target receiver when he was on that field for that stretch. He was. Mm-hmm. He led the team in targets, led the team in yards. But if you look at his fantasy play, he went, basically 6 straight games of under 10 fantasy points, and then had 2 blow-up games. And that's what we kind of remember about his rookie years. He had those big blow-up games, big yardage. Mm-hmm. And again, that's important. But staying on the field is even more important for us in fantasy. If he can't stay on the field and produce this way, right, his leash is not that long. If there wasn't the way this Packers offense was built, everyone's looking, these young wide receivers, they all have a chance to step up and take that next step. And the Packers are going to determine who they re-sign for big money eventually, right, based off this situation here. And if Christian Watson can't stay on the field and isn't producing enough, there's an issue for him moving forward for the Packers. And it could be where he gets maybe let go this past coming with it. His contract's pretty young still, but
he's still under a rookie contract. They'll keep him around until that gets close to running out, and then
But him and Wicks could switch places. He could be the wide receiver 4 on the team, and only kind of used here and there for big plays and for dynasty or redraft. Do you want the guy who puts up 2 games, 3 games of 30 plus fantasy points? I don't need an MVS on my team. He's a little bit better than MVS, but it's at least got 3 or 4 maybe. MVS only did one a season, but 4 games for an entire year. If he's producing those high levels and the rest are just mediocre or he's not on the field, it's kind of make or break for him, honestly, this coming season here. So
yeah, definitely.
And I'm more concerned than happy for him this year. So I'm actually going to swap. I did have somebody. I was going to go with Russell Wilson, but I'm actually going to stick with this situation here. I'm actually going to stick with Najee Harris situation, but I'm going to go with Pat Freiermuth. I think Pat Freiermuth is a guy who I'm pretty high on overall. I like him this coming season, but I think this is a pretty make or break season for Pat Freiermuth in fantasy and dynasty, and potentially the Steelers. He is a free agent after this year, so that could be a big thing for his value. The Steelers want to re-sign him. But Pat Freiermuth this past season, it was not great as we saw the year prior. I think if people talked about him if there wasn't Kyle Pitts in that draft class, he would have been the top tight end in the class. And last year was just so terrible. I mean, he got hurt, injuries happen, I guess. And then he came back second game in and posted 9 for 120. Not many tight ends. I remember that game. I sat him because I was like, oh, he's back. Let me start him again. And then, he puts up 1 for 9. I'm like, back to the bench, and then he blows up, and then you start him again, and then he goes, I think what was the next game after that? It was 3 for 29. It's you got to be kidding me, Pat. You got to be kidding me. But again, he isn't a make or break for fantasy right now. Right now, he's a pretty decent, if you want to wait on the tight end option, you don't want to go with one of the early guys, or if you're really trying to just go, I don't care about the tight end position. Pat Freiermuth will probably be there at some point, and I want to see where his ADP is at the moment here.
I mean, he is going to Arthur Smith, which does like to use their tight ends. They like to use multiple tight ends, but I feel like Freiermuth one-off has nowhere to go but up, like I said, based on last year. But can you get back to the 2022 where he was ranked, 8th in total points and 8th in consistency at 56%? Maybe. But is he worth picking and then it not working out? I mean, I'm certainly not going to draft him as my tight end 1 for my team, but I might get him as a backup, bye week kind of fill in and see what happens. If he starts looking good and they start targeting him more, then maybe he's worth starting as a flex depending on your lineup. So who knows?
Yeah, no, like I said, he's tight end 16 right now in ADP. And again,
Right.
you're probably not going to take him as your tight end one. You're not. I mean, there's a lot of other tight ends going to go ahead of him that you're not going to. He's probably going to be a free agent where you could pick him up at some point during the season. But it's that he needs to kind of get back into our good graces of actually being a draftable tight end in redraft. And I know that in Dynasty right now, I've been picking him up for 3rd round picks. Like people are just throwing him away like he is. He's done with the dust, which it makes sense. He really hasn't done too much this year. But again, he was first in red zone targets last year. You would hope with a better quarterback play with Russell Wilson or even Justin Fields that actually does better for him overall. Russell Wilson has done decent in his time with tight ends, and not always great, but inconsistent. We saw Fields, whether or not the weapons that were on the field. Cole Kmet had some pretty decent seasons in the last 2 years, so there's some hope there. We know that outside of George Pickens, there's really not much. Having a good camp, maybe they trade for somebody, but if not, it's Pat Freiermuth is potential target number 2 in that offense there. So for me, it's like this is a make or break season. I'm in on the make. He's practicing with Russell Wilson in the offseason, but if he doesn't have another good season, I mean, I messed up and should not trade those 3rd round picks away, but probably could continue to be not an option for fantasy right now. So.
Yeah. Like you said, Dynasty, I did a trade where, and I got him kind of as a throw-in. It was one of I was going for a couple other people, had some picks, and I said, well, if you throw Freiermuth in, and they're like, oh yeah, sure. Which I knew he probably would because he had a couple good tight ends, but we're a tight end premium league. Right. And so I'm like, hey, 1.5 points, and if he catches 5 a game, that's equivalent of 8.
It sure is.
So that can add up some numbers, man. So yeah, like you said, might as well grab him while his value is super low, and if he picks it up a notch, he might be starting on my super flex team.
That is the goal for us, right?
Yeah.
All right, Bob. Before we wrap things up, I'm going to ask you a question real quick here. Give me a player this year. I should have told you before the show, but I don't hate to put you on the spot, but is there a player that you're really liking for this season here? Obviously that people should really know about. Is there a player that I'm probably going to try to draft a lot of, or anything in general in that sense there? I know I'm throwing something at you right now while you're thinking.
No, it's fine. So, I'm looking, of course, at my consistency guide, and it has all my undervalued players, and that's where I find all these picks. So no, it's perfect time to bust that out. I think if I'm going to go to wide receiver position, and I'm going to throw out basically 2 because they're kind of very similar in why I like them. And it's Christian Kirk and Jacoby Myers.
Okay.
Christian Kirk's right now ADP is like wide receiver 35. 2 years ago when Calvin Ridley wasn't there, Christian Kirk was 12th in total points. And a lot of people forget about that.
They do.
And now he's back as the number 1 guy again. And Zay Jones is gone. So he's kind of the only thing Trevor Lawrence has, which is, again, where he was 2 years ago. So if you can get him as a wide receiver 3 or 4 on your team, maybe probably as a 4, I think it's a great value in round 7 or 8. And Jacoby Myers, same thing. A lot of people don't realize this. Do you know Jacoby Myers was 24th in total points last year?
Not a fan. No, I did not know that.
No. Yeah. Jacoby Myers was a wide receiver 2 in total points last year, 29th in consistency. And his ADP's I forget, wide receiver 46.
Wow. Yeah.
So again, as a wide receiver 4 on your team, this guy last year with garbage quarterbacks, basically Aiden O'Connell all year. And now he's got a little bit better quarterback in Gardner Minshew. But even if he matches last year's numbers as kind of the second fiddle to Devontae Adams, he's a hell of a value, man. And so I drafted him. And again, that league that I've been drafting in recently, we're almost done. But yeah, I got Jacoby Myers as my wide receiver 5, I think. And I was like, I'm good with that, So those are the 2 guys that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about their value right now. They're kind of like, oh, yeah, Kirk Myers. Oh, yeah. But when you really start digging into the numbers, consistency and total points, you realize these guys have some pretty good value in the mid to late rounds. So those are my two favorite.
I like that. I haven't heard much about Jacoby Myers this offseason, so it was nice to hear that mentioned on the show, Bob. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And I appreciate you guys who tuned in tonight, whether listening on our YouTube channel at the Fantasy Coaches, or if you're going to listen afterwards on wherever you listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to. We appreciate you guys for tuning in tonight. This was a lot of fun talking with Bob. Bob's somebody who I always like bringing on the show, like I said, this time of year, because it means football is almost starting to ramp up. So this is the type of year I like to bring in Bob. And once he gets his consistency guide done, I also love to bring him in for that too, because he loves.
Oh, it's done. It's been out for a month.
I know it's done. I've seen it. It's done. So like that's always a great time, to have him come on and mention it, because it's a fantastic tool to have for this coming season. So. Bob, I'll let you take the stage here. If there's anything you want to mention, whether it's the guide or the
let's throw it all out there. First off, of course, the 2024 Fantasy Football Consistency Guide is on Amazon. Just type in 2024 consistency, and it's probably the only thing that's going to pop up. And so you get that on Amazon. And if you're a Amazon Prime member, you can get it in 2 days. So that's cool. So if you want to get it, take on vacation next week or this weekend, get it, order it today so you can have it in a couple of days. And of course, the Fantasy Football Expo, August 9th through the 11th, Canton, Ohio. Tickets on sale at thefantasyfootballexpo.com. Get them as soon. Might as well get them now. Lock your spot in. You'll get the links to the discounted hotels so you can get a good spot. Of course, the DoubleTree was sold out months ago, but hey, still a lot of good hotels, and everything's 10 minutes away. So, of course, this year a special. We're adding the sports betting Saturday, which will be 4 hours on Saturday in the Dome at the Hall of Fame Village. And it will be all focused 100% on sports betting. So if you've been wanting to kind of improve your ROI, or you just want to maybe just start dabbling in it, figure out how things work and how it all happens, that's the perfect time to do that. And of course, we'll have the Fantasy Football Sunday as well, and all kinds of other fun. Steve, you've been there. It's a couple parties. You got some cornhole tournaments, flag football tournaments, all kinds of fun stuff. Tour the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So all great stuff. So again, Steve, thank you for having me on the show. Always a pleasure, and look forward to seeing you in August.
Absolutely, Bob. Absolutely. It's a great time, guys. So if you haven't gone yet, highly recommend it for sure. So, and of course, we'll be back next Monday. We're going to switch things up. We're going to be talking about some bounce back players. Hopefully my crew will be back next week here. I know Coach Steve will. The other Coach Steve will also be back, but we'll get Coach Tyler, find out where he's at. So we thank you all for listening. Tune in until next time, everyone. And you all have a great week.
Back to back is not far-fetched. We got a couple of Clark hands. I've been feeling super duper. How the heck they know the future? Come